Often when I approach the task of sermon writing, I ask myself, how can I be more creative? How can I mess with this story, maybe to make it a little more interesting? I mean, there are passages that are super familiar to people that you want to try to maybe spice it up because people have heard it so many times. So that's what I thought when I was reading this morning's text, the parable of the prodigal son. So listen or follow along as I read it. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country where he squandered his property in desolate living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? And here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quick, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate, for the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And he began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has gotten him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, and he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me a young goat so that I may celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you were always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" People have tried to preach this text backwards and forwards and sideways. They preached it from above and from below. They preached it from the point of view of the younger son and from the point of view of the father and from the point of view of the older son and from the point of view of the pig. Okay, actually, I've never heard one from the point of view of the pig. But wait, it could come. Pay attention. But when all is said and done, you still have the same basic story that Jesus told to make a very simple gospel point. And just maybe we should listen. I mean, this parable is like your grandma's classic chocolate chip cookie recipe. At some point, you want to try and tweak it, maybe to freshen it up a little bit. Maybe you'll add white chocolate chips or maybe a dash of cinnamon. But still, when all is said and done and your kids bite into that cookie, their noses crinkle up. And they just say to you, "Why'd you mess with it? We like those cookies better the old way." And this parable is one of 3 stories of lost things that were found that Luke tells in this 15th chapter. He tells the story of the lost sheep, of the shepherd who is watching over 100 sheep and one wanders off, and that shepherd leaves the 99 to go seek the one that was lost. And then he tells the story of the woman who had 10 coins and loses one of them and put the other 9 aside and tore apart her house until she found the one lost coin. And then he told this story of the lost son. Just 3 stories in rapid succession. And Jesus told these stories to hammer home a central point, a point which combats what the Pharisees and the scribes were saying at the beginning of the parable. This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them. And all three parables end the same way, with rejoicing. So the story opens with this youngest son using the equivalent of us saying, "You're dead to me," to their father. Basically, he's telling his father to drop dead. Now, in that time period, it would not have been unusual for a younger son to leave the home and find their own way and try to find their own life and find their own voice, because there really wasn't anything for him at the family farm, because unlike today, the younger son would have gotten nothing when the father died. Everything goes to the eldest son. So when the younger son was saying, "You're dead to me," that was one insult. And then he asked the secondary insult, "I also want half of everything that would go to my brother when you die." He was a gutsy guy. And the father said, "Sure." Gave him half. That's truly an awful thing that the son did, and it makes him a loathsome character. This younger son, basically, is a jerk. He's a fool. He's one of those people that you quietly say to yourself, "I'm glad that's not my kid." And I know you all said it. But that's the point. In this triplet of stories of the lost sheep and the lost coin and the lost son, we see a sheep who has some value. And we see a coin that has even more monetary value. And then we see a lost son who once had value, but makes himself into a grotesque and undesirable character, one that is easy to write off. In fact, most people would write him off. Certainly the Pharisees and scribes wrote him off. And this is actually where our story begins. This fellow eats with sinners. Or this fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them. I mean, Jesus was welcoming the very people that the religious establishment had written off. And he did more than just welcome them. He sat at table with them, which was an intimate act of fellowship that implied a kind of personal connection and bond. So we're told that the Pharisees muttered about this into their ears, and Jesus overheard their comments, and he knew their hearts, and he told them three stories that revealed the heart of God. And that's what's really going on in Luke 15. The parable of the prodigal son wasn't told so that fathers would be encouraged to be more forgiving of their naughty sons. Just as the parable of the lost sheep and the lost coin weren't instructions to shepherds, they weren't cautionary tales about how to take better care of our financial assets. No, all three of these stories were told to reveal the heart of God, a heart that is broken over things that are lost, and a heart that sings with joy when things are found. Jesus painted a picture that was the complete opposite of the joyless Pharisees. Pharisees who slaved the way for their God. Pharisees who were so worried and consumed about their own standing with God. They were so worried and consumed about avoiding spiritual contamination of any kind that they shunned and judged people from far away. And they didn't even think about reaching out to those who needed the love of God. But not Jesus. He was eating with the very last and least and lost souls who needed to know more than anybody else that there was a God in heaven whom Jesus represented, that was a God of generous joy. A God who was enthusiastic about our lives and eager to throw one party after the next for every bedraggled sheep, lost coin, and lost son who shows up on the front porch of God's house and God's heart and asks, "Do you have room at the table for me?" And God answers with a resounding yes, full of a cheer. A number of years ago, I read a book. Surprising. Last night, I read a book. A few years ago, I read a book entitled "The Kingdom of God is a Party." And it was written by Tony Campolo, who still is a Christian author, but he's also a professor at Eastern University in Pennsylvania and a Baptist pastor. Tony was in Hawaii on business. He was speaking at a conference, and he is from Philadelphia, and so he was in Hawaii. He was jet lagged. It was 3 a.m., and he wasn't tired. So he left his hotel, and he started to wander around the city. And he found himself in kind of a dicey part of town, but he was okay with it because it reminded him of Philadelphia, where he lived and where he served the poor. And so he found an all-night diner. He went in, he ordered a cup of coffee and a donut, and sat down at the counter. Soon after he sat down, about 8 or 9 young women walked into the diner, and you could clearly tell that these were prostitutes. They were taking a break from their evening work, and so they came in and they sat down in stools all around Tony, this Baptist pastor, and they began having a very loud and very crude conversation. And Tony was about to leave when he heard one of the young women say that tomorrow was her birthday, and that she had never had a birthday party and probably never would. He was intrigued, and so he just sat there for a minute, and the girls got up and they finished their break, and they went back to the rest of their evening work on the street. And Tony turned to the diner's owner and said, "Do these girls come in every night?" And the owner said, "Every night, same time, right after 3 in the morning." So Tony replied, "Well, I overheard that the one girl said that tomorrow was her birthday and that she had never had a birthday party and probably never would. Do you think maybe we could throw a birthday party tomorrow?" Well, the owner's eyes lit up. He said, "That is a great idea. Her name is Agnes, and she comes in every morning at 3 a.m. with a friend." And so the owner went around to the other regulars and began to tell them the plan. And so the next morning at 2:30 in the morning, Tony Campolo showed up with decorations, balloons, and streamers. The owner of the diner made a cake. There was a great buzz and excitement among the world-weary regulars. They were just waiting for this young prostitute to come in from her break. And when she opened the door, there were shouts of surprise and happy birthday. People began, yes, and singing. She walked in and they pointed to the birthday cake with her name written on it. And she was just so dumbfounded and speechless, the owner had to blow out the candles on her birthday cake. But before they could cut into the cake, she found the words to say, "Wait a minute. Do you think I could just go take this cake and show my mom?" So he said, "Sure." So she packed up the cake right then and there and went to go show her mom, who lived down the street. And amid the resulting laughter and conversation, Tony thanked the good-natured diner owner for all of his help. And then he said to the owner, "Do you think we could pray for Agnes and her friends?" And so Tony bowed his head. And he prayed for Agnes and for her friends and for all the girls who were working on the street that night. And when he looked up, the face of the good-natured owner had turned very suspicious. "Hey, what are you?" he said. "Some kind of preacher?" And Tony responded, "Well, yes, I am actually." The owner's voice was hard. He said, "What kind of church do you belong to?" And Tony responded with a gentle, "The kind of church that throws birthday parties for prostitutes." And the man poked him in the chest and said, "There ain't no church like that, because if there were, I'd join it." Funny thing is, he did that night. So I've been wrestling lately with the question that we began with today. What kind of Christian do I want to be? What kind of church do I want to lead? Do I want to be a Pharisaic Christian that is so worried about my own standing with God that I shun and judge from afar? Or do I want to rejoice when the lost are found? Do I want to throw birthday parties for prostitutes with no questions asked? I don't want to be part of the former. I definitely want to be part of the latter. So I guess my question is, what about you? Let us pray.